Grayson Coy, and welcome to The Bench, a podcast featuring conversations with people who are practicing, living in, building, and thinking about community. Today, my guest is Ben King, the founder of Armor Down and the Mindful Memorial Foundation. We'll find out more about what both of those things are during the course of this conversation. Thanks for being with me today, Ben.
Yeah, it's it's special, just being here, because the title The Bench, just like, I know where that came from, but that is, I think, the fact that we are here is community building, and it's community building that is from the heart, and that's where this came from. So it's just an honor to be here, knowing like what I hope to bring the best version of myself as a seed to make what you're doing grow, because I know exactly where it came from, and it came from such an unlikely place, and that's precisely what community building's all about. So I'm all in.
Yeah, thank you. So just to give a little background for my listeners, the way I actually met Ben was, so the title of the podcast came from, as I've explained, this bench I built to try to create community in the courtyard and get people outside and talking to each other. And one of the people I got to know through that was Andy, who was a very, very interesting, very special person, who was very funny, always made me laugh, always had good stories.
Don't leave out, you got to talk about Andy the whole way. You're talking about only the one side of Andy. You got to talk about the whole side of Andy.
Yeah, geez. Oh my gosh. So yeah, Andy, the way I first became aware of him, I didn't know his name, but I knew he was the guy that I always heard outside my window yelling fuck a lot. And then I got to know him, and yeah, the way I actually first interacted with him is when I was actually working on the bench, and he was like, "Oh, I got a great idea. We're going to make a flag for the bench. Yeah, that's the voice. Yeah." And he was dragging this huge block of wood over that it was too heavy to deadlift, and he finally went and got a dolly for it and brought it over, and I sanded it down and painted it. And, after that, he was really hooked on making the courtyard our space, kind of. I contributed the bench initially, but he brought out a bottle opener that was magnetic that he stuck on the side of the mailboxes. He started putting light up flamingos around the tree. He put up like way too many bird feeders, but everyone was too scared of him to tell him that it was way too many bird feeders, and they're still up.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And yeah, he would regale us with old stories. Andy really was a hero. He was he was wounded in Afghanistan. He lost his arm and was the first soldier, I think, in U.S. Army history ever to return to combat after suffering a limb loss like that.
He's a right-handed guy. He's a right-handed shooter. He got his right hand blown off. He had a prosthetic made. He had to re-qualify with his left hand. So he had to go from this way to this way with a fake hand. So he re-qualified, and I think he was one of the first people to do that. That was his 15 minutes of fame right there.
That's incredible. Yeah,
yeah,
you can find articles about him from that time period, and there's one in the Wall Street Journal, I know, that's quite interesting. But I know after his time in the military, things got difficult for him. He had a traumatic brain injury from from the same wound that took his hand, and I know there were a lot of issues that I don't want to get into, but he had a very tough time, and I know.
Yeah, he had PTSD. He had PTSD. He had complex PTSD fortified with a relationship to alcohol that was how he dealt with his PTSD. He used alcohol as the other side of the intensity of PTSD. The PTSD he had a hard time controlling, but he could control the alcohol, and he could kind of like use it to keep the PTSD at bay. And he did the same thing with just goodwill. Like, he did the same thing with goodwill. But anyway, yeah, he was someone who was right on the edge a lot, and that was kind of his gift and his curse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that COVID particularly wasn't easy for him.
Yes.
He was able to spend time with us in the courtyard, but I know that he did a lot with veterans groups that he just simply wasn't able to do because of the
Yep.
shutdowns and the quarantine and
Yeah,
stuff. And I'm sure that
the build up that he had to release that every day. There was an amount of build inside of him that was a complex batch of like anger and regret and pride and integrity and honor and like all this shame, like everything. It was just there. And then the military experience supercharged it. So he had to keep that in. And the way he kept it in was by always reaching out.
Mhm.
He always reached out. He talked to people all the time. And you wouldn't think he would talk to people all the time, because his first impact on everyone is almost always a sense of revulsion. Like, whoa. Because Andy didn't just come at you with an idea or a story. He came at you with a physical presence that was aggressive, a type of language that was aggressive,
Yeah.
and even a smell that was aggressive. All of his behaviors were like this.
Mhm.
And so when he couldn't put that out in all the places he did, because he brought a lot of life wherever he went. I mean, that's just what he did. Like every bar he went to, they loved him, and they also were like, "Oh fuck, here's Andy." They loved him, but they were like, "Oh fuck, here's Andy."
Well, I remember, yeah, I remember when we had the memorial for him. I remember right before that he'd been permanently banned from his favorite bar, O'Sullivan's, and he was really upset about it. It was just it was about a month before he ended
I
up
didn't
taking his
know
own life.
that.
Yeah, it
He
was
got
really tough for
permanently
him.
banned from O'Sullivan's.
Yeah, he was. I remember him, really, really mad about it one night, going,
Oh,
"That Canadian son of a bitch up in Toronto who owns the bar, he doesn't understand the situation on the ground."
God, you're good at that. Wow.
Yeah, but that was tough for him. But at the same time, I remember one of the people who came to the memorial was someone who didn't know anyone else there. He just knew Andy from the bar, and from having conversations with him that had clearly been very
That was
meaningful for
his
him.
community, and he had like 4 or 5 of them that he would give himself to. And the problem that he had was that he didn't know how to he didn't know how to control the PTSD. He thought he knew how to control alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
So he couldn't control one. He thought he could control another. But the problem with alcohol, that's always been the problem with alcohol, is that if you interact with it enough, you get to these moments where you can't control it,
Mm-hmm.
and you slip. And Andy kept slipping,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's, I mean, he just, it was inevitable. Like, because he would not change. He would not change. And he was adamant about his honor and the dishonor everywhere else. And so, you had to learn to live with Andy as completely as he was. And I mean, Karen, gosh, I
Mm-hmm.
like, Karen is just a really interesting person to know and to learn about, is Karen, because Karen loved him completely as he was. And like,
Yeah, for my listeners, Karen is Andy's widow.
yeah. She loved him completely and effortlessly. I know it was hard to do it, but she seemed to genuinely love him completely. And it was, that just, Andy was anyway. But back to community, the way that he kind of interacted with his demons in the biz was to interact with alcohol and interact with other people. And when he couldn't interact with other people and he just could interact with the alcohol,
Yeah.
I think it got too big. It just got too
Yeah.
big.
So yeah, Andy was a combat engineer, right? And he
Yep.
I know what you mentioned about that kind of cocktail of things he was always dealing with,
Yep.
pride and honor, but also shame and regret. Was something I really saw, especially in the conversation
Mm-hmm.
that we were having the night that he ended up taking his own life. I remember him saying, yeah, it still gives me like chills to think about it. It's still hard to think about, but I remember him talking about the war and me saying to him, like, it's strange because sometimes he would talk about what he'd done over there as if it was the proudest thing he'd ever done.
Yep.
The thing he'd done that he was proudest of, that he got to be the instrument of retribution, he would always
Yes.
say, for what happened on 9/11. But then there were other times that, you could tell he was really haunted by some of the things he'd seen and done. And I said, what is your overall kind of opinion of what happened over there and everything? And he said something like, I hate that I loved it as much as I did. And then I remember saying, like, knowing what that experience has done to you, I know that you have a lot of pride about that, but knowing what it's done to you, would you do it again? And he said, I don't know. And yeah, it was soon after that I walked him inside and, got him in the door. And that was the last time I or anyone ever talked to him, as far as I know.
Yeah, that cocktail, mind, body, spirit. So you got to look at it in his body. His body was not getting. See, part of what he got from the outreach and being around other people was the hormones of love, and like oxytocin is the hormone that is famous. But he got that from people, and I mean, he got it wherever he went. Like, he knew he was a good dude. But there was just so much noise that he was covering up. Like, all that cocktail, all that stuff was noise, and it was covering up. And I will say that, the communities that built up around him is solid. People saw the goodness in Andy, even though he was so aggressive in every form. But so physically, he wasn't getting that. And then mentally, his story, his identity, I think was always in question. I think the warrior was always something he questioned about himself. And I think he almost felt forced into it and then embraced it. But I think there's always been this really gentle sweetness to him that everybody sees through all the noise. And that sweetness right there is expressed in its opposite as his gruffness or his toughness. And from what I learned a little bit about his story growing up, was a lot of like anger towards his parents and his mom, and just just a real conflict there. But at the same time, he also had a lot of pride in his heritage. So it, to hear you say that he said he didn't know says to me that his story started to break apart. Like the story that maybe kept it going. And then the problem that he had to contend with more than anything was, I think he wanted it to end. Like, whatever the turmoil was, he wanted the noise to stop. So like I think spiritually was just as far away from love and God as you can feel. And that's like the darkest, deepest, worst crisis ever. And the worst part about it is in that storm, a little voice appears, which is arguably the opposite of God, that says there's an easy way to solve this problem. And because the firearm is the essence of the modern warrior, it's a clear choice. And that choice shows up at the bottom. Like, it shows up in the darkness. And I mean, I've heard it. I don't know if I've heard it as loud as Andy heard it. But, if you hear it and you keep hearing it and you keep hearing it and you keep hearing it, and all the things that sustain you start to kind of crack.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's how we ended up meeting, actually.
Yeah.
There was a memorial service for Andy on Zoom that was attended by a number of people from, a few different kind of spheres. There were some of his friends that he'd met who were also regulars at the bars he went to. There were
Korean War.
Yeah, there were his neighbors, which was
in
the group I was part of. Yeah. which was really interesting. I have a liberal arts master's degree. I've never served in the military. So I'm much younger. So he and I had very little in common. So I really valued that we were able to make the connection we did. And then the rest of the people there tended to be his veteran
Military
friends.
guys.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
it felt very strange being there for me in a way, because there was this sense of camaraderie that all these veterans shared with each other. And you could tell, as has been the case with other veterans that I know, that this wasn't their first time going to a memorial like this, that they'd all lost at least one friend in the same way. And I remember being really impressed just by how you guided that memorial service, how you really acknowledged everyone's grief, but channeled it in a meaningful way, and sort of gave us constructive ways to engage with it. Is that something you've done before? That you've done multiple times, led memorials like that?
Well, not like that, but it's the same thing over and over again in just different mediums.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the basic idea is kind of you connect the people to the story, and then you have a conversation, and then you kind of create some expression of heartfeltness. And the way you do that is through mindfulness. And mindfulness is all about kind of really coming to a clear awareness of what's going on around you beyond your story about it. And when you kind of settle into that space, it's a safe space. It's a divine space. It's got a lot of religious names for this space. If you give it a name, however, it becomes tricky, because as soon as you label it, it's not a thing that you can think about doing. It's like, I'm going to think about going into this divine space. That's not how it works. It works by you open your heart, and then you're in it, and you're in this. It's a loving embrace, right? And there's so much language in Christianity about the loving embrace of the divine, and that's not an intellectual space. So in order to foster that space, you have to embody that space yourself. And then once you embody that space yourself, you can just start to kind of bring people into the space too. And you see that reality reflected in open-hearted expressions by people. And what's fascinating is it even occurs over a daggone technology, over Zoom. Like you can even do it. You can do it thousands of miles from people. And so, but to answer your question, I've done it a lot, and I've done it a lot, mostly in Arlington. And so I've led, hundreds of 8th graders, and that's what I did. That's how Andy and I became tight. Andy was my co-facilitator for the Mindful Moment of Gratitude program at Arlington Cemetery, where he and I would go on essentially these trips with kids from 8th grade, and we would take them from the Military Women's Memorial at the gates of Arlington into Section 60, where we would honor or create the Mindful Moment of Gratitude program for a fallen warrior from their hometown that was buried in Arlington. And so we would give people, Andy and I would give these ribbons to students with the name of the fallen warrior on the back of the ribbon. We call these honor ribbons. Okay. And some days we'd give out 400. And what we would do is we would create this ceremony where we would teach people how to be more mindful, and why it was a big deal, and why what they were doing mattered. Mm-hmm. And it was just something that he and I just kind of fell into doing together. There's a whole lot of backstory about that with Arlington and the program and all that other kind of stuff. But each time I would do that, I would see the group coming, and I would begin to become very, very attentive to the things that I could be aware of that were in my control, like sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. So your senses, right? I don't have to project what's going to happen in the future. I don't have to anticipate this group. I'm just going to be right here present. And the reason I do that, and the reason you do it for your biology, is because if you can stay present and not get into a story or get into a past kind of fear or whatever, then you can keep your systems relatively even. And what that is reflected in is your body language. So you keep your systems relatively even. Your body language should be about neutral. So I'm working for neutral. So I start with senses, then I go into body, which is ground, pelvis, core, heart, throat, top of the head. So I just got to go through my body. I'm just keeping everything kind of real close, body language neutral. This big group of kids I've never met's coming at me. Keep it neutral, keep it neutral. Kids come, start to lead them, right? So as I start to lead them, I just try to make a connection. Real simple shit. Did y'all get breakfast this morning? How did you sleep? How do y'all like this weather? The simplest shit, just to make connection. Then from there, it's just in. You're just in it. And what's so interesting about this, and I think which is so important, and why community is so necessary, and why the act of consciously making community is so important, is that you don't have to figure the community out if you can help people be open-hearted. If you help people be open-hearted, then community is the natural phenomenon that shows up from the open-heartedness, right? It's the phenomena that shows up. Community is the phenomena that shows up, and then community is what supports and keeps safe the open-heartedness. So it becomes, it feeds itself.
A virtuous cycle.
Yeah. And so the idea is you have to figure out how to do that. Now, here's where the catch comes in. Okay, so we think, oh, that's great. I just be more mindful, blah, blah, blah. But then what happens is there are these moments, and it all is just a moment. Okay, just like there's any other moment, but it's just a moment. And whether or not you can handle that moment depends on whether or not that moment will turn into something that changes everything. And you only have a moment to do this, okay? Because the second you give it more than a moment, it becomes something. And the second it becomes something, you have to start dealing with it and interacting with it. And this goes to what I was saying, or what you were seeing when you're watching me practice in the morning. It's an art of peace practice. So what the idea is that you've got to be able to recognize that there's this moment right here. There's this moment, and you have to stay open-hearted through it. Okay, and that's really difficult.
So to catch up my listeners, this is one of the things that Ben does through Armor Down, right? Is these, well, I'll let you describe it, these daily sort of.
So I do a mindfulness practice in the morning. And currently the practice is based off of a book called The Art of Peace. And The Art of Peace is a book written by the founder of the martial art Aikido. And what The Art of Peace teaches is how to do what the problem that always is how to deal with the problems that always show up in community. So this book, The Art of Peace, is specifically about doing what we're talking about, which is fostering open-heartedness to support the development of a community, and then keep the open-heartedness inside the community while there are challenges, right? And if you can get through the challenges, then you can foster more open-heartedness, and then you can foster more community. And so these challenges show up every single day, every single moment, all the time. But anyway, in the context of leading a group, right, just like in the Zoom, but just like also in Arlington, is these little things would inevitably show up. And a lot of times, Andy was one of those things. Like, Andy was a moment of, like, how's this going to go? Or
I'm just picturing Andy with 8th graders. So.
8th graders, right?
Yeah.
Andy is the center of attention. He's with 8th graders. Every word out of his mouth, he curses more than he doesn't, right?
Yeah.
And so like it's just, and it's a gruff cursing. You have to tell him, do not have dip in your mouth, like sometimes a spittle, like like so. Andy always represented one of these moments. Now, because I study the art of peace, when these moments show up, I recognize them as they feel, as opposed to a story, right? And the reason why that's significant is just like the uncertainty of a group coming at you and you don't know how it's going to go and you stay present with the moment. Just like that, Andy's another version of that, just a little bit more spikier, right? A group coming at you is it's like a slow kind of thing. Andy's like this. Boom. Handle this.
Yeah.
And if you handle it, you got his respect. And once you get his respect, you feel like a better person because he respects you. Like you, like he you just have to, you would have had to have known him, so you just have to take our word for it.
Yeah,
but
no, that was the experience I had with him, was that and that's sort of what Karen said to me on one occasion, actually, was that Andy, you know, Andy's first sort of real interaction with you was seeing you out here building this bench, you know, doing something, and he respects people who take initiative and do things, and that, you know, really set you guys off on a good start to have a relationship, even though you're not very alike in other ways. Yeah.
It's all that mattered. And to have Andy's respect was something that, you know, you would appreciate, right? So anyway, we'd be with this group, and there would be a moment, and the whole group would kind of look at me like, and I felt it too, right? I felt the disruption in the status quo, the out of the ordinary, the profane, like something would show up and I'd feel it too. But that is the act of being able to feel that feeling, not let it show up in your face, not let it show up in your voice, but just kind of, it's going to be okay. Like it's going to be okay. And that's what would happen with Andy, is like it would all start out and all your signals are like, this is going to go bad. This is, he's got a damn tattoo that says cut here. He's an infidel. So cut my head off here. Like he's got these tattoos. He's got this hand. It's this metal thing. He's got skulls. He's smelly. So this has got to go bad. And then it doesn't. And you're just like, And the first time that happens, you're like, maybe that's just an anomaly. And then it just happens over and over and over again. And then every single time the group would recognize the goodwill in Andy. And then it would just be off to the races. And once I knew that happened, then the open-heartedness was now sustained by the community, and it was no longer on me, the facilitator, to do much other than to just be like that's the goal, right? The goal is to get to the point where the community sustains itself. And the key piece is always getting through those moments. And the problem about not getting through those moments, and this goes back to Andy, is that if you don't address these moments in a regular kind of way, if you have no framework for how to do it, or the volume of whatever you're suffering is so loud that you can't address those moments, and you develop really, really, really devastatingly bad habits, it will inevitably start to break down, and you'll notice it in the response of your community.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's the thing, to tie it back into this community building. And this goes back into the morning meditation, is that our job as community makers is to be exceptionally adept. And in the art of peace, they say taking 99% of the kind of like the Andiness, like the aggressiveness of it, to see the Andy underneath, right? And that's always there. That in no matter what situation you're in, there's always a moment that's there. And if you and you'll see it, it's not like something you barely see. You'll see it as long as your internal environment is open-hearted. If you're open-hearted, you'll see it. If you're not open-hearted, you'll miss it because you'll be in your story. And if you miss that moment, then everything shifts. But if you capture that moment, which is what the community has to learn how to do in a kind of a structured way, if you capture that moment, then you can foster open-heartedness. And the second you make it through one of those moments, open-heartedness becomes more self-sustaining. And then once you get that going, then the community starts to thrive, and you really don't have to do hardly anything after that.
Yeah. So what I'm picturing with those moments you're referencing, and I don't know if this maps entirely onto what you're saying exactly, but a lot of my friends who are parents will make this observation that when their child's learning to walk, they'll fall down. And when they fall down, there's always this moment where the baby has like shock on its face and will look at you as the parent. And if the baby sees you, cringe or look worried or frightened, they'll start crying. But if they see a smile on your face, they'll say, oh, okay, something went wrong in my world that threw off the equilibrium that I have here.
Yes. That's okay.
But yeah, exactly. If there's this sense that this disruption or this breach isn't fatal, that that it'll be over in a second, and that the love and care and community is still there, then it's possible to get past that without the disruption getting worse.
That's really well put. Yes, precisely.
I wanted to ask you, I wanted to kind of backtrack a bit and just ask you a little bit about your own background, kind of your own service, and how you kind of came by these guiding principles, how you first encountered the idea of mindfulness, and the idea of Aikido and the art of peace, and how you just sort of this guiding philosophy that you practice and that you try to bring to other people to bring them.
Yeah, sure. So the community I grew up in was very predictable for the first 10 years of my life. It was predictable, loving, warm, just spectacular. And, it all seemed intentional and purpose-filled, and my parents just created this wonderful, incredible world. And then at the age of 10, in a very freak moment, my little brother at the age of 2 died in a freak drowning accident. And that was a 10 years, and then poof, bottom dropped out. And then everything was trying to kind of build back up. So in the process of building back up, I developed an understanding and an anger towards life and towards God that was, a driving force in my attempt to never feel that depth of pain and sorrow again. Like I would become tougher than this. So for the rest of my kind of formative years, I followed a track that tied pretty closely to kind of Western idealized masculinity. Like, what's the toughest way I could possibly be, or what's a path to be the toughest I can make myself. So I did Boy Scouts to Eagle Scout. I did football all the way through high school, became the captain. I did fraternity in college. And then after September 11th, I joined the military. And at each turn, my hope was that I would get to a place where I would never feel that again. I figured if I could survive in the harshest of environments, then clearly I wouldn't have to be so afraid all the time, and I wouldn't have to feel so bad all the time. And so I went to the war in Iraq, and my experience with the war in Iraq was as a psychological operations soldier. So my job was to foster community between the kind of frontline military forces, whose main job was kind of policing, and the local Iraqis. And so worked with an interpreter every day, did a lot of interaction with leadership and people and members of the Iraqi community, and mostly just rapport building, relationship building, problem solving. I argue it's one of the greatest. It was the greatest job in the military, and so we got to interact with all the frontline units too. So it was just really spectacular. But anyway, 99% of that experience was what I described. It was quite remarkable. But 1% was just a lot of violence that just showed up out of nowhere. Like everything is just do, and then boom, like, you know, rocket, sniper, mortar, IED. And on New Year's Eve, we got hit by an IED. That could have been worse, but it turned out to be not so bad. But it was, you know, one of those moments where life, you know, flashed before my eyes. Everything slowed down. You know, the whole nine. And I ended up getting medevaced and going to the rear hospital and spending several days there and seeing aspects of the military that were just unimaginable, like the amount of like compassion and respect that everybody gave the kind of the wounded in action. And it was all IEDs. I mean, it was just, it was all IEDs except for one Marine. The one Marine was in the medical bay in the like green zone because he had been shot by one of his fellow Marines for being an asshole, you know, typical Marine shit. But everyone else was IEDs. And so when I came home and, you know, people wanted to hear my story and I was honored with a Purple Heart, like everything, it felt like I had achieved this kind of goal. And after about 6 months, the fact of the matter was I had not achieved anything, and I really started to fall apart. And the big reason I started to fall apart was, you know, I had developed really poor habits for how to manage the feelings that I was experiencing. Everything was so much louder. Like it was astonishing how much louder everything was. Like I couldn't handle it. And like stress was louder, excitement was louder, everything was just louder. It was like I lived in a, you know, the spectrum was 1 to 16. And then all of a sudden the spectrum was now 1 to 20, but everybody else was at 16. I'm at 20, they're at 16. And it's just not, it's not there. And so my identity really fell apart. You know, these terrible habits, you know, really just getting to the place where the identity, the spirit, and the body were just so dark. And the worst part was that at the bottom of the darkness and it was malevolence. Like there was a part down there that is the opposite of the best version of myself. And it's dark. I don't know. I mean, and a lot of times I call it the demon, you know, talk about it like that. But it feels very real when all my systems are just totally tanking. And, you know, when you're not sleeping and all that other kind of stuff, that's, I mean, it's what happens. I mean, your biology just can't handle it. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. So I had moved in that direction, and what really kind of helped me move out of that direction was I'd always been very active with exercise and physical training, and I was a personal trainer for a while. And part of what was breaking down was that I didn't have any ways to exercise. The way I exercised before the war was very purposeful, and it was CrossFit based and super high intense. But after the war, my body hurt so bad. I wasn't sleeping. My back and shoulders hurt so bad that I couldn't motivate myself to exercise. So I just felt really trapped. And so out of desperation, I took a yoga class. And this was 2010 or no. Yeah, it's probably 2010. And I'm kind of walking up the stairs of the gym, and it's like around 11 o'clock. And I see the yoga class filling up with the soccer moms, you know, And I was like, fuck it. So I went in. That was such a cliche, man. I was like, I thought I was so cool, right? I thought I was such a badass. I was a warrior. So I bought a motorcycle and it was light blue. And I was like, pull up on the motorcycle and thinking I'm so bad. Anyway, I took that yoga class, and what really hit me was the teacher was super cool. She was super cool and totally chill. And I walked in there, and she did what I described having to do to make the group open-hearted. She enabled me to be open-hearted. So her name's Jewel Greenberg, and I say her name every chance I get. I walked in, she's like, hey, you never been in a yoga class before, have you? She just gave me this warm smile. I was like, no. She's like, here, let me give you the special purple blocks and this purple mat, and you'll just be fine. And I was just like, you fuck with me a little bit. All right, that's cool. And I armored down, right? So I kind of got like, I was like, all right, cool, I'll try it. So I went to the back and did this thing where she was like, all right, now breathe your shoulder blades up and exhale your shoulder blades down. And at first I was like, shoulder blades? I always thought of my shoulder as here, like just strong. That's my back. That's the muscle. I work back and buys, stupid shit like that. Meathead days, right? So she's like, breathe your shoulder blades up and breathe your shoulder blades down. And I did that. And I felt this like warm spread go across my back. And I was just like, whoa, that's not something I typically feel. That's nice. And so then we did the exercises themselves, the movements themselves, and I felt my body. I really felt my body a lot. And that night I slept. And so that was it. Like the sleep had become a major issue. And so I slept that night, and I was like, well, I'm just going to keep doing this. So I kept doing it, and it helped so much. And that was kind of how I ended up connecting to the mindfulness community that was being taught at the DC VA. So this is 2011, 12, something like that. And so I just by kind of luck, like I ran into a person who I hadn't seen in a long time. She asked me how I was doing. I said I was fine. I'd gotten back from the war in Iraq, yada, yada, yada. And she was like, well, you ever taken mindfulness meditation? And I was like, no, I never have. And she's like, well, my friend Karen, she teaches it at the VA. I'll get her to contact you, and you should go try it. And I was like, okay. So that
is this
woman,
Andy's
Karen,
wife, Karen, or is this a different Karen?
This is different Karen. This
Okay,
is
different
Karen
Karen. Okay.
Soltz. Yeah, Karen Soltz. And so she called me that night, or sent me an email that night, and she's like, since you're a vet, just come to the VA, come to this room, da da da. And so I did, and we were just sitting in chairs, and I remember it was a Korean War vet, no, it was a Vietnam vet, older guy, and I was like, what's this like, man? And he's like, well, I'll tell you this much. You ain't awake, but you ain't asleep either. I was like, all right. so I'm expecting, of course, a bunch of like, woo-woo kind of stuff. And when we sit down, she turns on a recording of a guided breathing practice for 5 minutes. So simple stuff like, okay, now take a deep breath in and see if you can feel your breathing go really far down into your belly. And I'm like, I don't fucking know if I can do that. So I was just like, and I felt my belly move, and then she's like, okay, and let that out. And she's like, all right, now see if you can breathe in and feel it in your chest. Okay. I can do that. And she's like, okay, now see if you can breathe in and feel it in your shoulders. Okay. And so by the time I got through 3 breaths, starting to chill out a little bit. Okay. And then she's like, all right, now we're going to do the guided portion. So then she's like, okay, I want you to pay attention to the feeling of your right thumb. Okay. Now can you feel your right pointer finger? Okay. Right middle finger. Right ring finger. Right pinky. And she'd do that all the way up the right, and then all the way down the left. And all she's doing is calling out body parts by about, I don't know, 15 minutes in, I'm in this liminal space, and I'm not asleep, I'm not awake, but there's this slowness to it, this quality of kind of weightless, just kind of, that way you get kind of when you're like half awake, half asleep, just kind of like quiet. And I remember I was just quiet, and then we finished up, and I kind of, all right, left, and that fucking volume that's at 20 was like down to 16. I was like, I can change the volume. I can take 20 to 16 without all the other stuff that I typically am using to take 20 to 16. Whoa. So I kept going back to that. And when that happened, that's when mindfulness became like a thing that I could actually work on, right? Like before the practice of mindfulness, I did not perceive my mind and the stories that it tells as separate from who I am. So I identified with whatever my mind was creating, and I was not interacting with my body because most of my body experiences were painful. Now, the yoga really started to help me reconnect to my body. So the two together resulted in an awareness of how to move my body that didn't hurt and felt really good and helped me sleep, and how to interact with my mind in a way that impacted the volume. And so the first thing was, oh, it impacts the volume. I'm sleeping better. Let's get this out there fast to, veterans as a way to help them sleep. And so we thought we were going to create these flyers. See if I got an example of one. But we were going to create these flyers to give out to veterans with a QR code on it. And on the QR code, if you scan the QR code, it would take you to a guided mindful meditation, just like that one Karen did. Mm-hmm. And so we thought that we were going to give those out at the VA. Well, that fell through at the VA. So we had all these cards to give out and nowhere to give them. And it was April. And that's when I was like, ooh, what if we give them out to all the veterans that show up for Memorial Day? And so that's what we did. And that was the first mindful Memorial Day, was just to get it out there fast, right? But what we realized from the mindful Memorial Day, that was 2013, was that trying to connect veterans to the idea of mindfulness intellectually was a bridge too far. It was, yeah, I'll give it a shot, but it wasn't like, there was no meaning behind it. It was just another thing, right? So that next year, we were like, well, if we want to get this out there, we want to share the practice of mindfulness. How do we do it? Well, what if instead of trying to connect to someone's intellect, we attempt to connect to something that's heartfelt, something that's meaningful? And that was where the idea of honoring a fallen service member with a mindful moment of gratitude was born out of the what would a veteran or a military person be willing to give their undivided, open-hearted attention to? Well, a moment of gratitude for a fallen service member, in honor of a fallen service member. There's no bridge too far there. There's no stretch. It's like, hey, you want to honor a fallen warrior with a mindful moment of gratitude. Well, what's that mindfulness stuff? Well, we just think that when you honor a fallen service member, you should do it with your undivided attention. Everyone agrees with that. Everyone. Because that's universal, right? It's a universal thing. And so that's how that started. And what that started was the idea that to connect this stuff to the warrior community, you'd have to do it in a way that connects to their heart before their mind. So you got to be heart first. And so from there, we kept doing Mindful Memorial, then it became a foundation, and that became an offshoot of Armor Down. So Armor Down started as an LLC. Excuse me, it started as a blog. We went to trademark the name. We got attacked for the name Armor. Then we had to defend the name, so we made it an LLC. The LLC created Mindful Memorial Day. Mindful Memorial Day was so successful, we turned that into a 501c3. But Armor Down continued as a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. All the politics and admin of this stuff gets ridiculous. And we moved forward with creating these programs centered around things that we knew veterans would already find meaningful. And so what we did was we went to different veteran service organizations and we said, look, we've got these great programs that help veterans connect to the practice of mindfulness. Can we serve your community with these programs? And so that's what we started doing, and we've been doing it ever since. And we still do the nonprofit work at Arlington, and it's all centered around bringing mindfulness to the warrior community in a way that they'll kind of understand. And so the way it works is every morning I do the morning mindfulness practice, which is about 30 minutes. And in the practice, I teach what I call 4 bells mindfulness. And each bell represents a thing you pay attention to. And the sequence of the bells is very intentional because what we know from the warrior community is that the mind was taught to be attentive to threat and assess threats in order to survive in a combat zone. And that type of kind of attention is organized around analysis and anticipation. And so those two places are really good in a combat environment, but they're really poor at kind of settling, right? And so the present moment, the first bell is to encourage people to tame their mind with their senses. So, what do you hear? What do you smell? What do you see? The simplest shit, right? Which is the taming of the mind. The second bell is getting to the body. And what that means is that you do, like I talked about in that class, where instead of she just calls out body parts. It's a phenomenon called interpolation. Like, you can't not think of a purple elephant. Like, you just can't, because you understand the words, it has to happen. So what happens in a guided meditation, or what happens when we tell you to pay attention to your body, is if I say, put your attention on your feet, for just a moment, your attention goes to your feet. And what happens is you get kind of deeper into the practice, your attention goes to your feet, then it goes to your pelvis, then it goes to your core, then it goes to your heart space. And by the time your attention gets to your heart space, it's more attentive in general, which means the volume has really started to come down. All your systems are starting to kind of settle into a nice kind of rhythm. So the relaxation happens at second bell. Third bell is breath. And I also talk about this in the context of doing the work. Calming down and relaxing is just nice, good for you. You've calmed down and relaxed, but now you got to do the work. And the work is the breath. The work is the being with whatever's there. And so we do a breath practice around bell 3, but then bell 4, and this is where it comes all the way back to the bench. Bell 4 is the practice of opening your heart. Right? It's an open-heartedness in the forms of gratitude and compassion. And the whole point of all the bells is to get to the 4th bell, right? That's the point. That's the practice. And that's where and the reason why that's the point is because the most powerful thing is not you, the individual. It's your capacity to be open-hearted, to open someone else's heart. And when 2 of you can open your heart together, and then 3, and then it grows. And then what happens there is that it becomes that self kind of feeding kind of thing where it all becomes kind of intermingled and supportive. And then from that point, the goodwill tends to carry it forward. And so to create community in the Armor Down space, we're trying to do this thing digitally so that the practice exists every day that people can participate with, but also do things online and do things in person at regular intervals throughout the year. So Armor Down has kind of like a calendar, like what we do every year. So we always do something over Memorial Day, which falls under the foundation. And then we always do something over Veterans Day. Then we have the training every morning that's easy, free to access for anybody. Then we do Zoom programs that you go through a paywall to get through. And then we sell our meditation cushions. So the Armor Down meditation cushions are...
Which, yeah, I'll definitely plug all these links in the show notes.
The Armor Down meditation cushions is what kind of drives the thing, right? I mean, we're not trying to make money, but at the same time, we have to make money to keep it going. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is we sell meditation cushions, and every time we sell a meditation cushion, the person has the option. So we sell our meditation cushions for $99. They're hand sewn in the mountains of North Carolina. They're made from the same material that they make military duffel bags. They have a special QR code on them, just like this. It gives you exclusive content. But then you have the option, if you want, to spend another $27 to get a cushion for a veteran. And so then we sell these cushions. That kind of feeds the beast, so to speak. And then another significant part of our outreach is we give away dozens of cushions a month to veterans, right? And what we try to do is we try to foster a kind of a heart opening moment when they get these cushions. These cushions are given for free. They typically come from people that are expressing gratitude. So it's a moment that's heart opening. And then to capture that heart opening moment, we encourage people to come practice in the morning on Facebook, right? And so the idea is, I mean, clearly you can create community over the internet. Like, you can do it. It's not as real and good as the face-to-face stuff, but you can do it. And during COVID, it's been a lifesaver. But the hope is that after COVID and we can start getting face-to-face, we'll have these opportunities to create these moments where we can come together in person to have these special moments, but also we can still stay connected through stuff like this and through the practice in the morning. So just trying to navigate how that's come together. And I'll get off my soapbox here, because tying it back into community is the thing about community building that I understand from my experiences so far is because the same thing I was able to do with the Zoom, and the same thing I was able to do with Andy, and the same thing I've been able to do at Arlington is the same thing that I've been able to do and recreate in all kinds of other situations. And it's the same process every single time. And I actually have a philosophy around how I do it, and it's called only if it's easy. And the reason why it's got to be easy is because community has got to last. Otherwise, you can't experience why it's valuable. So you can't build community if it's really, really hard, right? Now, being in a community doesn't mean there won't be hard work, but it can't be sustained by the skin of your teeth, right? The community has to build at the edge of ease, because if it builds beyond the edge of ease, it teeters and becomes unsustainable. And so what we've attempted to do is consciously be aware of ease at 3 levels. The first level is at the ease of idea, right? So the community that you're trying to build has to be easily identifiable to the people that interact with it. And by that, I mean their story has to easily blend with the community that you're trying to, or they're trying, or you're trying, or they're coming into their awareness. Their story has to blend, right? If it doesn't blend, forget about it. That's why we had to talk about mindfulness with marksmanship. That's why I had to talk about mindfulness with honoring the fallen. If I talked about mindfulness to, reach your 7th chakra and, meet, a Hindu deity as an expression of the divine, I wouldn't get much traction, right? So that the idea has to be easily connectable. The second thing is physical. It physically has to be easy, not just physically easy to like do itself, but to get to, right? So you can't do something that's community based that's difficult for people to get to or difficult for people to do. You've got to always be thinking, is this easy on the body? Can the body do it over and over and over again? So that's that. And then the third piece, and this is the piece that made me smile, I mean, from my heart, when I realized who you were and why you're starting the bench, is that there has to be, you have to recognize uncanny synchronicities. So synchronicities that you just can't deny are beyond comprehension and are way bigger than you can imagine. So, I mean, clearly, Andy was a gift, and it's only because of him that you and I are having this conversation.
Yeah.
That is,
No,
yeah.
it's occurred to me a few times, like, well, maybe if, you know, I hadn't gone and built that bench, and maybe if we hadn't, you know, become this group of friends in the courtyard, you know, things may have ended up the same for Andy, and I would have heard about it, of course, but I would have just heard that the guy I'd overheard, you know, yelling in the courtyard had died, and I probably wouldn't have shed a single tear. As it was, I shed quite a few tears over it. And, you know, as did a lot of our neighbors who also got to know him. And we, you know, had some really long nights talking and processing that together. But I just remember thinking at every stage of that, like, I'm so glad I'm feeling this grief and that I have this community to process this grief with me, because it's infinitely preferable to not having known him and not having felt this.
Yes, and I believe that is what it means to be alive. Right? That what you just said has something to do with the meaning of life itself. Mm-hmm. And I think life wants us to recognize that. Mm-hmm. And I think life is always trying to guide us to that level of understanding that there is a relationship that life is having with us and wants to have with us. And so when you interact at the edge of ease and you fit the story in, and it all starts to tie in, what happens is that ease is less and less armor, right? Because what armor does is armor protects you, but it also presents the world as fearful. So the more armor you carry, the more you have to be self-identified. The less armor you carry, the more you open up. The more you armor down, the more your heart shines through. And the more your heart shines through, the more your goodwill starts to have a consequence.
So that's why the armor down, the video that plays on the website, it's you know, it's a soldier in kind of body armor, and you see the armor kind of lift away from him, and then also, you know, it's this kind of animated diagram of a person, and then like his skin and even lifts away, and this person just almost kind of dissolves. Yes, it's a very interesting illustration.
Yes, precisely. And what happens is that the open-heartedness begins to take on its own momentum, and when you build off of goodwill, it sustains. It's sustaining. When you build off of goodwill, and that starts to happen, and when it starts to happen, at first it's just kind of like, whoa, can you believe that? Like the shit that we saw in Arlington. Oh my goodness gracious, just astonishing moments of just like jaw-dropping synchronicity, where you're just like, oh, like I did this like 10 minutes ago, and I'm doing it again. Like, wow, and just awe and wonder, and just gratitude. And so then you just start having gratitude, and then you start to realize that you can do it in a lot of different places. Now, before it sounds all great, you got to go back to this reality, which is no matter what, no matter how perfect the story is, no matter how smooth the ease is, no matter how many synchronicities, there's still going to be these really, really difficult moments, no matter what. And so there has to be a willingness to be with that stuff. And it's hard. Life is so hard. And so having a practice like mindfulness really fortifies me and everyone I hope who practices with me, with a sense that, you know, I'm doing the best to create with goodwill. I'm moving forward with open-heartedness. And the more I do that, the more resilient I will be when the fucking pandemic comes. like,
Yeah.
But even before that, it's when my kid falls and trips, and instead of, like, I mean, even still, my daughter Liliana, when she stumbles or hits the ground or falls, which is pretty weakly. I mean, it's not like, I mean, they're playing hard, right? So they're running, they're doing their things, and I mean, we were hiking the other day. Liliana's almost 5. She was running through the woods, tripped up on a root, and just boom, landed right on her chest. Bam, hard. And I felt pins and needles all down my back. And that was always what I did. But I was like, I felt it, but instead of creating this reaction, I went over to and showed her warmth and love, not concern and fear, just warmth and love, right? And so I was, you know, and so the practice supports that, and so that, you know, get positive little build there, and a positive little build there, and what happens, and this is where life takes on the qualities that really make it special, and this is ironically what the qualities of being at war is kind of like. It's like an intensity. It's like a fullness, right? In war and combat, there's a fullness at that edge, right? Because you have to be totally focused because your life depends on it. It's very kind of short. It's short and intense, right? As a civilian, right? Life's like this, right? So you understand at combat, you understand that edge, the excellent moment, like the life is full, like at the edge, right? You get it there, but then you come into here and you can't find it. And you're like, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
I know this. What do I do with this? And then slowly what happens is you start to build all this stuff. And if you're the biggest problem with Andy is he built a whole lot of good shit, but he also built a whole lot of bad shit too. So he was way out of whack, right? And when the pandemic hit, that just dropped him.
Yeah.
Right? But what you do is you start to kind of build all these wonderful little things, and you have to do it open-heartedly so that they last. And then over time, you foster this type of life that supports you, and there's more joy and wonder and awe. I heard someone describe it today as you experience more peace, love, compassion, joy, and intuitive wisdom. That's what you start to experience more of.
Yeah, I find all this stuff about mindfulness to be really, really interesting. I wasn't, before I met you and started watching your guided meditations in the morning, I wasn't as familiar with this, but it's something that's really interesting to me. And I know that among a lot of Christians, especially a lot of, Protestant Christians, there is a lot of kind of skepticism toward these kind of ideas. So like I grew up as a Protestant, and, whenever you prayed, you were encouraged to like, rather than praying a prayer that you'd memorized or something, you were encouraged to pray like extemporaneously, come up with the words come up with words on the spot.
Okay.
Because there was this sense that like prayers that were memorized or that were designed to be repeated repeated over and over again was something, Eastern and something kind of foreign, and that you were, but there was something missing there where like, if I'm coming up with words on the spot, it kind of prevents me from really stilling myself in a way almost.
Oh, absolutely.
So I remember when it was right after I graduated from college, actually, I was out of town doing job training and was staying with this family who were Catholics, and I was really stressed, and because of this new job I was starting, and they had this rosary hanging from their doorknob, and I just kind of on an impulse Googled like, how do you pray the rosary, and picked it up and did that. And I'd never experienced anything like that before, where it takes about 20 minutes to go through, and for those 20 minutes you're just repeating the same prayers over and over again.
Which
Hail
prayer
Mary.
did you? Yeah, Hail Mary.
Hail Mary, full of grace, Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God,
pray for us sinners now at the hour of our death. Amen.
Yeah, and you pray that about 50 times around the rosary on the beads, and like I said, it took about 20 minutes, and it just stilled me in this way. A way I heard it described afterwards is, there's one kind of prayer where you talk to God, but this is a kind of prayer where you listen to God.
Yes.
And the point of repeating it isn't that, you say the magic words 50 times and, you get brownie points. It's, you say those words while you're meditating on particular ideas and events from the life of Christ, and that it puts you in a place where you're receptive and where you're still and able to kind of listen. So I definitely see a lot of overlap with that and with mindfulness. And I think that, Christian traditions that de-emphasize that are really losing something that I think is very important.
Yes.
I remember, I was watching one of your mindfulness meditations actually, and you talked about going through those 4 bells and how if you had a stressful moment during the day, you could just go through those 4 bells sort of instantly, almost, just in a few moments to kind of steady yourself. And there's, it reminded me of something. There's another prayer that's from the Eastern Orthodox tradition that a lot of Eastern Orthodox use, and especially monks. It's called the Jesus Prayer, where it's really short. It's just, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And you say the first part as you breathe in and the second part as you breathe out. So, there's guided breathing attached to it. A lot of the time you put your body in a particular position as you do that. So it really does acknowledge that you are, body, mind, and spirit. It gets all of those involved. And it's something you can do. It's a prayer you can say at any time in the day, just to sort of recenter yourself. And you can say it in the space of, a single slow breath. And I think, tools like that are really, really valuable, especially just to kind of, you respond to moments where you are feeling overwhelmed or stressed out. To get you through those moments we talked about where it's kind of that tipping point, right?
The edge. Precisely. I was raised Christian. I was raised Catholic. And so that was part of my anger when I was 10 and my brother died. I was so angry at God. How could he do this? We went to church every Sunday. We tithed. Everything you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to do all these things. And we did all those things, and God took my brother away. And I was so angry and so mad. And I left the study of God from the Catholic lens, and essentially kind of left that realm and went east and studied kind of divinity and all its other forms. And truly, only I'd say in the past week have I come back to Our Father and calling it the Lord's Prayer. And I've always said it. It's so interesting what you just said. I've always said it just as memory, right? Just kind of like, Our Father art in heaven. I say it every day with my kids for prayers. And just recently, like literally within the past couple days, I've been interacting with that prayer in a much more focused kind of way. And the part that I've focused on the most at the moment, and I've been breaking down the Lord's Prayer to all the different lines, is the part that's really sticking with me is at the very end, for the kingdom and the power are yours now and forever. And, or the kingdom, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. So this idea for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. The kingdom, the power, and the glory is for you. It's not for me. And one of the things I've noticed in the community building space was I fostered a community around an honor quest over Veterans Day in Richmond, Virginia. And at the end, when it was all said and done and everything had gone really successful, I remember leaving, and I just remember like feeling empty, like why doesn't this fill me up? Why isn't this filling me up? And I got this feeling that what I was doing is I was looking at it from a selfish perspective, from myself. And there seems to be, in what I am feeling more connected to and slowly developing language and confidence around, is that there is a relationship, and I'll first use language that I think is as neutral as can be. There's a relationship to life, that life is there to be with you and to support you and to nurture you and to show you what you are. But what you're learning is not that you are some independent thing, it's that you are a reflection of it. And so anytime you're consumed in any notions of, yes, this is me pulling this off and I'm doing this community building and I'm doing all this great stuff, it's just empty. And I'm sure life, continuing in the neutral language, kind of smiles and like silly little human, it just kind of laughs at you like, been at this for 13.5. I've been at this forever, so it's nothing new there. You'll try again tomorrow. And so when so going over this prayer, I was just like, the kingdom and the power and the glory are yours now forever. I was just kind of like, that's where my attention has been. I was looking in the wrong direction. I was looking back at myself as it's for me. I did a good job, so I need to be praised. Good job. Good, Ben, you're good. Ben is good. Ben is a good person. Yay, Ben. And no wonder that was empty. And now it's like, oh, this open-heartedness is grace, right? And so then let's move into the God language. It's the grace of God. Like, it's what it is, what community is done well. It's the grace of God. It's what the grace of God looks like as human, right? Is community. And like, when that hit me, all of a sudden the Lord's Prayer, which I've repeated by memory, a million times, I totally connect with what you said about that on the moment, just creating the prayer on the moment. That's arguably presence, right? But what the Catholics would do is essentially called, in the Buddhist tradition, mantra, right? So you use the mantra to center. So anyway, but like to connect to the words and to see that, my true power, and this is also what's articulated in the Art of Peace with his language, is that my true power is my ability to participate with the grace of God. And the more I armor down and get out of the way, mind, body, spirit, the more the grace of God works through me. And even at the end, when the mission is completed for whatever, I'm not doing it. It kind of like goes back to that Zoom call. Like, my job was just to create a space where people felt they could be open-hearted, and then grace took it over. And so, like, the kingdom and the power and the glory are yours now and forever, I think really put it all together for me. Like it, like this moment. I mean, the fact that this is all coming together is a very, it's a very clear synchronicity, divine synchronicity for me, that is representative of a kind of a level change, or like a shift or something. I mean, this is such a moment that I thank God for it. It's really all there is to do.
Yeah, I really liked what you said in another one of the ones I watched, where you said that mindfulness mindfulness is a form of practice. It's not like a religion. It can enhance the practice of any religion, which I think is
Yes.
why every major religion has some version of
Yes.
that.
Yes.
And there's this idea that humility, this is from C.S. Lewis, I think, but he says humility, when the Bible talks about humility or whatever, it doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less.
Yes.
Because, you don't want to think less of yourself. You do want to see yourself as someone who's valuable and who's worthy of being cared for. But to think of yourself less, to cultivate this open-heartedness is the real goal there.
Yep.
I also wanted to ask you about kind of honor and what it means to be a man, because I mean, honor is not a term you hear a lot anymore, especially outside of military circles. I specifically remember when I was in college, there was a professor who, whenever you would take a test, he would send around this piece of paper, first of all, that just had a short little paragraph at the top that said, like, by signing this, I, affirm on my honor that I've not, received any improper help with this exam. And you were just supposed to sign it and hand it back, and that was all it was. But it was the first time I'd ever really heard that phrase. I've heard, like, oh, there's this thing called honor that I have, and no one really talks about that anymore. And then, in kind of popular culture, you've recently seen Jordan Peterson, if you're familiar with him. One of his big things is, do you have a noble goal? Are the actions you're taking noble? Are they honorable? And so many people just like sit up straight when they hear that, because it's not something anyone talks about. And you, in one of your videos, you said, I think the phrase from The Art of Peace was something like creating honor without battle.
Yes.
Yeah. And you talked about, the kind of the greatest generation, right, that fought World War II, where so many of the men in that generation had this shared sense of honor that came from their service in the war. And, a lot of emotional scars that came along with that, obviously. But that today you have, a very, today's wars are fought by a comparatively tiny part of the population. And rather than by kind of the whole sort of mobilized population, and and how that's changed that dynamic. So there's a lot in that question, but I was so fascinated by that line of thinking, and I was hoping you could unpack that a little more.
So honor and grace, I think, are very closely tied. I think also to be humble is not to think less of yourself. It's to recognize that the best version of yourself is when you think of yourself less. So you become that conduit, right? And so in my mind, when you honor something, you give it your undivided attention. And what you understand is that your undivided attention, fully without armor, is grace. I mean, it's what the spark. We're made in the image and likeness of our Creator, to go into that realm of language. But in the neutral language, we know that our engagement with other people has an impact on them. We just know that. And if you love yourself, not are in love with yourself, but if you love yourself, because you have to love yourself before you can love another. Like you can't hate yourself and love someone. You just can't do it, right? I mean, you can kind of do it, but if you really want to love someone fully, you got to start with yourself, and your ability to love others will be directly proportional to your ability to love yourself. And so when you give something honor, you're giving it the best version of yourself. Now, you may hate yourself 99% of the time, but when you honor the fallen, or when you honor your boy, or even when you, I mean, even something as simple as a toast, I mean, like that, just, I lift my attention to this. That's that little spark shining through. Now, if you're covered in armor, right, that little spark just like ekes out and then it drops back down, right? You know, it's like, you know, you got people that are, I mean, heck, if my life is any example, in the darkest times, you're interacting at your base level. You're interacting with porn, you're interacting with alcohol, you're interacting with distraction, you're interacting with anger, you're interacting with blame, you're interacting with othering. You're probably in an experience of yourself that revels in the misery of others. I mean, I'm just, you know, for myself as an example. So when you honor something, living a life like that, it doesn't mean that the honor is not there. It just means that there's all these layers that the honor is trying to get through. And part of Armor Down's job is to help those people recognize that all this can be dropped in a moment, right? And you can honor something. And when we honor the fallen, that's where our culture, that's a spot in our culture that everybody can agree on. And so we gotta use that spot, because what that spot does, and I've seen the armor come off of people in Arlington, man. We had this Marine came, and some of the armor is not self-imposed. It's not habits, it's just life. I mean, we had this one Marine show up with his t-shirt, and he had, I think it was 26 guys on the back of his t-shirt. He was a lieutenant in Fallujah, and he lost 26 guys. And this was the first time he went to Arlington, and we put 26 ribbons around his neck. And you could just see each ribbon weighted him down, but it also opened him up. Like, now, chances are, lifestyle, whatever, he went right back to armored up. But for that moment, there was this open-heartedness. And so honor, everyone has the capacity to honor something. It's just your undivided attention. You honor a conversation, you honor your friends, you honor your children by giving something your undivided attention. And what happens when how to generate honor outside of battle is to freely but intentionally give your undivided attention to the things that you want to give, or to your community. Like I don't know if I started after Andy's death or not, but I've been alcohol free now for 80 days. And I mean, I had a memorial for another guy who alcohol played a role in his demise. So I haven't drank alcohol for 80 days. And what's happened for me is I'm spending less time thinking about it or managing its consequences. And now I'm not thinking about it at all. And what has resulted is, in that space, there has been more space for loving on my daughters, loving on my wife, handling complexities, making them a little less complex. And so what's happening is the more this kind of self-protection analysis, whatever kind of stuff has settled, the more these moments of just like pure like attention show up. And to see my kids like light up, and like just to see these kinds of things, you just feel this, right? So a lot of times we talk about open-heartedness as like this goal to get to, but arguably it's the status quo. Like it's what we always have. It's why there's always, you know, redemption in Christ, you know, that it's always there, right? but you got to get to it. And what you got to get through is trauma, culture, identity, and politics, right? We have to understand that politics is the mental health of the nation. And it's because it's America, it's our politics, it's also a reflection of the mental health of the people, right? So we are in what we are in. And so you got to get through all that to get to the good stuff. But if you can get to the good stuff and start really working it, it doesn't by any way, shape, or form mean that your life's going to be sunshine and rain and like gumdrops. It just means that you'll be able to open your heart, be more open-hearted, see the kind of the fruits of that labor. I mean, there's a great biblical quote that says, "Judge a man not by his actions, but by his seed or seeds, or by the fruit," or something like that. And I just love that. But that's what you see. So that's what it means to generate honor outside of battle. It's you know this is inside of you. You've seen its capacity to do goodwill. So when you give something to you give your honor to something, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I really like that definition of honor as just giving your undivided attention and the best of yourself to something. I know, so like to give an example from my own life, I know that before I got married, I didn't, when I lived by myself in an apartment, just with roommates, when I would make dinner for myself, I wouldn't make myself very good food. I would just make what was easy because I didn't care enough about myself to make myself good food. And then, when I married my wife, it was, I was really, really anxious in the weeks leading up to the wedding because, it was this daunting idea that like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I want to do this right. And that means giving the best version of myself to her, being the best version of myself for her. And I'd never really had to do that before.
Mm-hmm.
I'd always sort of been the good enough version of myself.
Yes.
Right. Because I didn't, I grew up in the church, obviously. So I like, if you'd asked me, I would have intellectually answered like, oh yes, I owe the best version of myself to God, but I didn't necessarily live that way because it just hadn't, become real to me yet. But, getting married and thinking, yes, I need to give to this woman the best of myself, the best I can be. That's what I'm swearing to do here. Just really reoriented my whole life. Right. And I think there is something, I like that's why I really like the definition of honor as honoring something, as giving something your best self and your undivided attention, because I think there does need to be something external for you to kind of form that around.
Yep.
Which is, goes back to community. It's like we need community. If you didn't have other people or a community or an ideal or just something above yourself that was worthy of honor, you wouldn't have any incentive to be that best version of yourself. Yep. Right. Yep. There's an analogy I've heard where if you picture people or a community as like a fleet of ships, there's three things that need to go right. The fleet's sailing somewhere, presumably, so they need to be going the right direction and arrive where they're trying to arrive. The individual ships in the fleet can't bump into each other because then they'll sink. And then each individual ship in the fleet has to be, well maintained, because otherwise they'll bump into other ships.
Right.
But you need, to get that first one, to keep your own ship maintained, right? To keep it on course, you have to have this destination in mind, and B, you have to have other ships around you and a concern for them, because if there's no one around you and it doesn't matter where you go, you have no incentive to
Yes.
maintain your ship. You can just swerve all over the ocean and it doesn't matter.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I like that a lot.
Yeah. So I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I did want to ask, come back to kind of the second half of that last question I asked, which was about kind of the experience of being in the military and in this particular set of military conflicts we're involved in right now, and which are fought by, like I said, the kind of an all volunteer force that's a much smaller portion of the overall population, and that is in many ways kind of a dislocating experience. I know you mentioned like drone warfare being a huge innovation, and how that affects the way people experience war. But yeah, I can definitely see ways in which that's been a process for a long time. So like in A Farewell to Arms, Ernest Hemingway's World War I novel, there's a scene in which he's wounded by an artillery shell, and the way he talks about it the whole time is he's entirely passive. It's not like it would have been 1,000 years earlier where you're on the front line with a spear, kind of looking the enemy in the face as he wounds you. He's just sitting there like eating a piece of cheese or something, and all of a sudden he's flying through the air.
Yes.
So yeah, his experience of modern war is one that's very kind of disorienting and even like emasculating in a way, in the sense that he didn't get that opportunity to kind of stand up and face it down in any way. It was very much all taken out of his own agency. Right. So yeah, I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that, and how has that affected the veteran community in which you do all this work?
I think part of it is a sense of a little sense of isolation, a sense of feeling separate and seeing that as a kind of a badge of honor. Pride, we're kind of on our own in this. I think there's also a sense of I think this is playing out as a part of the military and beyond the military, which is it's kind of a failure of the warrior, the American warrior identity, to kind of create something that's sustainable and lasting. I think the veteran community does not. It's like the ships. I think some of them are well sustained, and I don't think many of the ships are bumping into each other. But I think there's an absence of direction, and so a lot of the community is centered around stopping suicide and giving people opportunities to be more resilient, which is kind of keeping the ships afloat. But there doesn't seem to be a direction, something to create and foster as kind of an identity, like the warrior identity. And I think what that represents is that the culture is incomplete. Like, I think there's this part of the American warrior identity that imagines itself to always need to be ready for war and to be the greatest war fighters, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's like we've kind of created an incomplete narrative. And I think we might be starting to complete the narrative as we've built more resiliency into the warrior community. but I still think we identify with combat as this mark of masculinity, or the ideal, or the place of the highest self, the place where the highest self can be the most recognized. And I think that's kind of a mistake, because as time goes on, so many less and less warriors will have the experience of the actual combat, of the actual fight. And as a result, so many will be left with this kind of false belief in this warrior ethos. And I think that's playing out in a sense in the militia movement. And all these individuals are becoming very identified with the notion of the warrior. The firearm is very unique. It's like the samurai sword. It's the AR platform. It's the body armor. It's the willingness to stand up and support the Constitution. I think those are all noble things, but the problem is that the means by which we are imagining our best is behind these weapons. And the second any of us use these weapons, even downrange, but now it's like, are we going to use these weapons on Americans? The second we use them, all of our honor is kind of corrupted. And so it's like we've founded our identity around this notion of what it takes to be the best version of this warrior, around something that the second we use it, the honor disappears. So the AR platform, by its very nature, cannot be experienced to its fullest potential unless it's used in combat. And the second any of these people use this weapon in combat, and if they did use it to its fullest potential, it would just be awful. Be awful. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know where we're headed as a warrior society. I mean, America has been in wars all for, I think, but like 14 years of its existence. We have, I think, over 800 bases around the world. We've got more guns in the United States than we have people. And there doesn't seem to be at the moment a clear indicator of how they could be kind of really useful. And yet the gun is the source of the identity. So it's this weird, I think we're in a conundrum where we've really put a whole lot of stock into a particular set of patterns, habits, beliefs, and ideas that are fundamentally flawed. And if we're identifying with something that can only be really experienced as a total like societal collapse, it doesn't have a lot of legs. It's just, so I don't know. I apologize to your viewers. I feel like I should have had a better answer for that, but I don't know.
No, that was really, I think that was really well said. I think there is really a crisis of identity among especially American men right now, where, yeah, there's this sense of restlessness, right? And there's this, desire to do something and assert oneself in some way, and it is connected a lot to this warrior ethos, I think. So I think that's why you see things like militias, why you see sort of violent protest movements, why you see school shootings to the degree that you do, I think. And there's a novelist I really like named Walker Percy who says, there's a quote from him, I forget exactly what it is, but it's something along the lines of like, when this sense of restlessness and directionlessness builds up among people long enough, the end result is war, because if you don't know what to do and you don't know where to direct your energies in a way that's, you know, productive and meaningful to you, war almost comes as a relief to you.
Yep.
But I think that, you know, I know you said you weren't entirely happy with your response, but I think that the work you're doing with teaching people mindfulness and teaching people how to be mindful of things, how to, you know, give their full attention to things and give the best version of themselves to things is absolutely a step in the right direction, and is bringing healing to this issue in a lot of ways. So I wanted to, you know, I figure we should wrap up. We've been going for a while, and getting a
How
little
long has it
hungry,
been?
but it's been almost 2 hours here. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you, you know, for your service, first of all, and second of all, for all the work you've done in the veteran community and beyond since then. And thank you so much for talking to me this evening.
Grayson, it was spectacular. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good night.
You too.